Welcome back, everyone. My name is Miss Campos, reading specialist at the Central Middle School. Thank you for joining me once again as I share weekly reading strategies for you and your family. Today is day 2, and we are going to focus on comprehension. In our day 1 session, you learned about the different tiers of vocabulary words with our triangle. How do the different tiers of vocabulary help us become better readers? As mentioned before, in day 1, we were focusing on vocabulary and how they fall under 3 tiers. The common language, tier 1, academic vocabulary words frequently found in written text, tier 2, and tier 3, content-related words that we might have to find a definition. So let's take a look at a poem. Let's take a look at one of my favorite poems. It's written by Robert Frost and it's called Nothing Gold Can Stay. We're going to read through these lines. Nature's first green is gold. Her heart is hue to hold. This word I'm going to underline. Her early leaves a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf. Going to also underline this word. So Eden sank to grief. Going to underline Eden and grief. So dawn goes down today. Nothing gold can stay. I'm going to also underline the word dawn. So now that we have identified vocabulary words in this poem, we can simplify these terms, try to make some sense out of them so that we can better understand the poem. And one way we can do that is by taking these vocabulary words, finding the meaning, but also replacing it with a more familiar word, like a tier 1 word. So if we go back to her heart is hue to hold, we said that it was a color or a shade. I'm going to pick shade because we're talking about the color gold. So it's a shade of gold that is hard to hold. We move on to subsides, then leaf subsides to leaf. We can say it rest as a leaf, stays as a leaf. So Eden sank to grief. And I mentioned that Eden is basically a paradise in the biblical study. And grief is to have a lot of sadness. More simple. So something that makes us happy, like a paradise or heaven, sank to grief. Goes down to grief, meaning that the happiness that we can find in paradise is no longer there. So dawn goes down today. And dawn is the very early morning. So I'm going to use a word like morning. So morning goes down today. Like day might mean like in the afternoon. So just as the morning leaves and turns into the afternoon and then into the evening, things change. And therefore the poem ends with nothing gold can stay. Let's take a look at another example. This is another one of my favorite poems. It is called Deserted Farmhouse by Mark Vince. It has metaphors and similes in it and rich vocabulary words. So let's quickly take a look at it and see what vocabulary words jump out at us and what tier would we place these words in. So that way they can help us better understand the meaning of this poem. So if we start where it says, where the barn stood, the empty milking stalls rise up. I'm going to underline the word stalls. Like the skeleton of an ancient sea beast. Exiled forever on shores of prairie. I'm going to underline exiled and prairie. Decaying timber moans softly in twilight. We can underline decaying house collapses like a broken prayer. Collapses. Tomorrow the heavy lilac blossoms will open, higher than the roof beams, reeling in wind. And I'm going to also underline reeling. So as we read this poem together, I noticed some vocabulary words that I might need to think about their meaning to help me better understand this poem. And again, for every reader and every student, this could be different. Some words that jump out at me that I might need help understanding might be different than some that you might already know. So take a look at these words that I underlined. And I want you to think about which tier would you place these words. Keep in mind, I did not underline any words in the tier 1. Tier 1 meaning words we already know, we are familiar with. So if I bring back our triangle, words that belong in the tier 2 academic that you would mostly find in written text and has multiple meaning, and then words that would need definition that is not commonly used in the tier 3 and that they relate to a content area. I will leave you with this poem here. Try to think about which category those words would fall under and why. So we looked over a poem and noticed the vocabulary words, what tier did they fall under, and how did those tiers help us figure out the vocabulary and understand the poem better as an example. Continue as you work at home, continue to practice this skill as you're coming across passages and stories that you are reading, and try to see how you can decipher the vocabulary word within that passage that are a little bit difficult to understand depending on the tier that they fall under. Stay tuned for day 3 of our next session. Thank you for joining me once again.